Tubbs. I'm going to hit the record button before we go anywhere else. All right. Well, we are glad to have you guys here tonight. We are going to finish up. I think we had like 2 verses or so left in 25, and then we're jumping in to 26 tonight, Genesis 26. So let's open with a word of prayer, and then we can go from there. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word and for this time to be together as your people, a time for us to grow, a time for us to be together and formed by your word. We thank you for the friendships that are here and for the gifts that you give to all of these your people. We ask that you be with us now in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. So we are at 25. Is that right? Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay.
End of 25.
End of 25.
End of 25. Okay. I will go ahead and reshare the little file that I have here.
I don't think we were at verse 25. I think we were like 30. Were we 33?
So we get to eating the lentil soup.
Yeah, okay, we got to the lentil soup. Yeah, we have to, the lentil soup, some of the red stew there. All right, well, I'll just start reading at 25, and then we'll just catch ourselves up to where we need to be. So the first one, Isaac came out red, his body like a hairy cloak, and so they called him Esau, which means hairy. And afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So they named him Jacob, which means heel. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. Remember, he got married when they were 40. So it was 20 years. And when the boys grew up, Esau was a skilled hunter, a man in the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in the tents. Isaac loved Esau because Esau ate of his game, because he ate of his game, sorry. And but Rebekah loved Jacob. So we talked a little bit about how each parent loved a different person for different reasons here. Then 29, once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew, that lentil stew, for I am exhausted. Therefore, his name was called Edom. Edom means earth or red. And we had that conversation then about the hymn as well. So I'm going to put that in for Easter. I decided we're going to sing it.
All right.
No one will get it except for us, but we'll sing it at Easter time. So Edom, yeah, red earth, nice nickname, right? Stew boy. And Jacob, right on the money here, 31. Jacob says, sell me your birthright right now. Esau says, I'm about to die. What use is a birthright to me? I think there's some hyperbole here with Esau. At least I would imagine there's a little bit of hyperbole here. I don't think he's come in from the field and is just so utterly exhausted that, one more moment and he will absolutely fall over, perishing. I could be wrong, but that's what he does. So Jacob pushes the issue to swear it to me now. Won't be dissuaded. He wants this birthright. The reason he has to worry about this is unlike in Western, particularly American society, where we tend to, in our wills, pass on things fairly equitable, unless there is some kind of a division in the family. Right? Most people, if you've got 2 kids, you split it 50-50, right? Or you split it by, kind of what would benefit each one, or, some kind of equitable management. In the ancient world, it didn't happen quite as much. Firstborn, they got the birthright. So they got the title, they got the land. This happened, and then secondborns, they did what's left. It wasn't the most equitable of situations, but it's what it was. And so Jacob here shows us his, how do we say it? His ability to scheme. Gives us a little bit of a foretaste of his personality that we will see later on. So he sees an opportunity and he grasps at it. All right. He, just like he was always grasping at his brother's heel in the womb. So now he gets him by the heel again, trips up his brother with this request when his brother is really just looking for some food. And so, like I said, Jacob pushes the issue, swear it to me. And so Esau swore it to him, sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. And so Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate, drank, rose, and went on his way. And thus Esau despised his birthright. I love how in the scriptures we can get just this absolutely wonderful bit of detail, and then the most important point, that he despised his birthright. That's it. Just one line. Then we go on. And we're not even going to talk about Jacob and Esau in the next chapter. All right, we're going to talk about Isaac again. We have this kind of flashback to their lives and to the, kind of what's happening as the boys are growing up. So we don't have an exact age when this happens in terms of Esau giving away his birthright. He may have been fairly young. And so this could be kind of, we'll say, youthful indiscretion. But nevertheless, this is certainly a good lesson for us, that let your yes be yes and your no be no. This is, we don't play around when you make oaths or you make promises to people. Certainly the scripture here teaches us to take those things seriously. There isn't a way out just because, oh, I was hungry, I didn't really mean it. No, you said it. It's accountable. All right. Anything you guys see in this? I've got one or two other little notes here. Why do you think that Esau gives this away so easily, so quickly?
No idea.
Because he's super hungry.
Because he's super hungry.
But
Okay.
it's a little soup. It's not like it's a 13-pound prime rib. Right?
I know.
No.
Esau's the hunter,
Yeah.
right? Jacob's just the dude who plants a garden and stays by the tents. So
Sure. What do you want to say?
Mm.
And cooks.
Wasn't Esau Isaac's favorite? So he probably expects that even if he says this to appease his brother, his dad's not going to give it to Jacob. He's going to give it to Esau anyway.
yeah, exactly. And that's why it uses the word, you're absolutely right, Lorelei. Because Esau is banking on the idea that he can't give it away, that he doesn't possess it yet. And so it's up to his father to be the one who gives it. And so that's why it uses the word despises the birthright, right? Esau has no authority to give it away. Jacob should have known this, but here really shows by this interaction that Esau cares very little for kind of the order of things or for what his words might render. Banking, as you say, on the idea that good old dad loves me more than you. So he's going to make sure that it happens, even if I don't care about it. So there's certainly the spiritual teaching here in honoring parents in this, right? And also just kind of letting our yes be yes, teaching on oaths. Some have also seen this as Esau engaging in the sin of gluttony, which sounds strange when he says, I'm dying.
Just hungry.
Yeah, that's right. But how could this be the sin of gluttony? What is the sin of gluttony?
Overindulgence.
Okay.
Too
Yeah, overindulgence or overvaluing of food. Right, putting food or the you might even say the sin of gluttony as a sin of pleasure, of hedonism, right? That it's putting the pleasure of life over those things that are more important. So that's how some of the early church read this as well. That Esau's despising of his birthright is his giving into sin, where he is more worried about the physical comforts of the life that he has than the spiritual heritage that he's been given. And so he kind of rejects the promise by doing that. So just a little bit there on that. All right, good. Gluttony was a big deal, particularly in the early days of the church, and certainly in the Old Testament time as well, because they didn't have a lot. So you didn't have to eat a lot to be gluttonous. In fact, and this will sound funny, one of the major complaints that often would come up in monasteries when they were first created was that some of the monks were being gluttonous. Now, these monks were typically given 2 loaves of bread a day, like little loaves and water. That's what you got. There's no meat here, Ken. Sorry. I know.
I like a monk, but I'm not really a monk.
Yeah. You need to get the hair around the edge.
I could get it there. That's for sure.
There you go. You can go as Martin Luther this year then, man. Or Friar Tuck. Whatever you want to do.
Friar Martin.
There you go. Either way. But that was actually one of the major critiques. So there'd be some monks who actually accused their fellow monks of gluttony, because some monks, when they received their 2 loaves of bread, instead of eating them at 2 separate times, they would eat them all together. They were being gluttonous about their food and their consumption. So I know, Jeff, there's always somebody. There's always somebody. Monk stories are actually wonderful places to kind of get, I don't want to say the Aesop's fables of the church, but these wonderful little lessons of the church. There's another monk story, actually. A gentleman comes into a monastery and the father lets him in, and he's trying to do the monk stuff, but he can't stand his fellow monks, right? They're always doing stuff wrong. They're messing up the prayers. They're not cleaning right. They're not doing all the chores right. All of these things. So he says, finally, after a while of this, he says, I'm leaving. Forget you guys, right? You guys can't do this right. Just making me angry. I came here not to sin, and all you're doing is driving me to sin. So he goes and he lives in a cave, and he's in the cave 8 hours before something happens, and he gets mad, and he throws a stone at his 1 pitcher of water that he has, and he breaks it. And in that moment of shattered pitcher, he realizes that the anger he had was not something that was the fault of anyone else but himself. And so he returned to the abbot and asked for forgiveness, because he knew it was all inside himself the whole time. If you want more of these, there's wonderful little books out there about early desert fathers and their little teachings. And they do things like this, just kind of teaching the faith in these little stories. But that's not why we're here. We're not here to talk about little stories of strange people lived in deserts long ago. We are here to talk about important people who lived near deserts very long ago. All right, let me find 26 there. All right, send that one. So we need to move to chapter 26. Chapter 26 in Genesis deals with Isaac, and it really parallels much of the interaction that we've already seen. So this feels like almost like a rerun of a sitcom. We went through with Abraham, times of famine, looking to go to Egypt, lying about his wife, dealing with Abimelech and the Philistines. And we get all of that here in Isaac. So it should be something that feels familiar, even as we have a new character. So starting at verse 1, now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, and the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven, and I will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. And so Isaac settled in Gerar. Okay. So, what stands out here in these first 6 verses to you guys? What do we want to talk about?
Well, the Lord appeared to him as he did his father.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So yeah, the Lord very clearly here doesn't remain distant. Even as Isaac is the recipient of the promise, Abraham has taught him the faith, the Lord still comes to him and reaffirms this in a wonderful way, right? In the, I will keep my oath to your father and I will make it to you too. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I find it odd that they mentioned he went to Abimelech, and then they don't mention him the rest of the whole paragraph here.
Yeah. So that is so verse 1 really is more setting the stage. Okay, this is what happened. And then this is kind of then verses 2 through 6 describe what happened, or kind of what happened as a result, or how it came to be. So verse 1 is, all right, there was a famine. Isaac went to Gerar. Why did he go to Gerar? Well, the Lord appeared to him, said, don't be dumb. Don't go to Egypt. Egypt is bad. Stay away. Instead, go here. Right? So it helps us to see that Isaac, number 1, was planning to go to Egypt. He didn't obviously get his father's memo. Don't leave the promised land. Stay here. Right? So the Lord steps in, shows up, says, whoa, 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 man. Hey, stay here. This is the promise I've given to you. Live in the promise. All right. And so dwell here, dwell in this place. And so he does. He does listen. Certainly Isaac is faithful in this. This is a good and gracious thing. So that's kind of verse 1. Abimelech will come back. Abimelech is key in this story.
I have a question, Pastor.
Yes, by all means.
How do they think the Lord appeared to like Isaac and Abraham?
That's a great question. And the answer is we aren't sure. There are times in the Old Testament where it'll say that he appears in a vision. And so we would take that typically to be almost like a daydream or even a trance-like moment where the Lord really makes himself known to one person and that person kind of steps out of time for a moment. There are other times where he makes himself known in a dream, right? Other times he makes himself known through prophets or priests. This can happen, or just shows up himself in a pre-incarnate kind of stance, as we heard the other night in Joshua, when the commander of the army of the Lord just shows up, which is Jesus. In this case, all we get is the Lord appeared to him. And so we have a kind of a plethora of options. And various scholars have went through various opinions on this. Nobody has really stuck their foot out there and said, this is it. But I would guess that it would, if it follows, and I think this story does very much follow how the Lord appeared to Abraham, that this is some kind of a physical manifestation, whether it be a manifestation of voice, which can happen, or voice and image. Probably not the pre-incarnate Son. Jesus probably isn't kind of physically visible before him, but the Lord somehow makes himself known and speaks. So there is that. I would put this very similarly to when the Lord appears to Abraham and makes his oath, right? And he says, do these things, and then as the dark settles, the lights, the kettle and the fire go through the animals that have been cut in two, right? So kind of spiritual appearance, physical manifestation of sound, and maybe something else corresponding. Okay, cool. Good stuff there.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So
in relation to Abimelech, my study Bible is saying that Abimelech could have been like a title, because they're
Yeah.
saying years have passed since Abraham's encounter with an Abimelech of the Philistines. So
Mhm.
it's not the
Yeah.
same Abimelech.
It might not be. We made mention of that in passing when Abraham first dealt with Abimelech, that this could be a throne name. And what we mean by throne name is a name taken by the king whenever they take on that role, like his majesty. We actually have, there's one instance that I am aware of in which people still take throne names, and that would be in the papal office. So when the Pope becomes Pope, he takes a new name. That's a kind of a throne name, and typically takes a name of some renown. In ancient cultures, that throne name tended to be the same. So Abimelech, meaning God is my father, or my father is king. That's what it means. My father is king. So it could be a different Abimelech. My nose says that it's the same guy. We'll get into why that is, though. I think it's the same guy because he doesn't trust Isaac further than he can throw him. For good reason. Because dad tried to make a mess of this.
Verse 10. 9.
Yeah. So lots of kind of different things here. I didn't have time to track this down. It's a question that's kind of nagging, and I will try and have an answer for us. But we get in verse 5, right? My charge, my commandments, my statutes, my laws, 4 different things. And are these all the same thing? Are they different? Right? What are they in reference to? I didn't have time to track them down, but we'll see this pattern, or you would see this pattern if you look through the scriptures, particularly in the book of Exodus and in Leviticus. You'll get these words, even Deuteronomy for that matter, as descriptions of some of the commandments of the Lord. And I just didn't have time to track down this week where commandment is used versus statute versus these other pieces. So they're all more technical descriptions. So just kind of putting it there. Typically, when I was taught Leviticus, it was, these are all mean the same thing. Then why use 4 words, man? They all mean the same thing, right? They mean very similar things, but I do believe they are technical language. I just haven't been able to track down exactly how it is. I will do that for us, though, at some point. Okay. Now, I went and looked at Luther for this, and I was both gladdened and very sad, and that's because Luther spends 20 pages on verse 1. Luther writes forever about famines. Because he writes, and when Luther writes a commentary, he tends to basically write something that he feels would be appropriate for those people who he is ministering to in that moment. And so he's trying to help them think, just like we do, all right, there's a famine in the land. What does this mean? Do we ever have famines in the land? Well, sure, we can have famines that are physical famines in the land. Can we have any other kind of famine?
Mhm.
Spiritual famines, right? A year ago, put you guys all through multiple weeks of famine without having a Lord's Supper, right? Having to meet, having no possibility of physical interaction, all sorts of things. So Luther makes kind of this big, long, drawn out conversation, goes after the Pope and all sorts of people. But he makes this comment in all of this. He says, when the word is flourishing, the Lord gives an abundance of spiritual food. Physical hunger soon threatens, for the devil takes away the sustenance of the church and wants to kill it off with hunger. I thought, wow,
Sounds pretty effective.
it does, doesn't it?
It does.
Right? That when the church is thriving, right? That's when the world goes to hell in a handbasket. But in all of this, what do we do then? Do we worry? We look to the Lord, right? And we rejoice that we have enough food. At least we have spiritual food, and we ask the Lord to sustain us. So the important piece, or an important piece in this, is that the Lord calls this a sojourning, right? Sojourn in this land. Why does he want Isaac to suffer and endure this famine? Because of what's coming after, because of the fullness of his promises that are going to be made manifest, right? Why would the Lord tell us, allow the devil to take away things from us, except that by this lack, he would form us for what he is going to give us in plenty, right? So this really, Luther kind of opened my eyes a little bit here on this, that not just to pass over that, okay, there was a famine, bad things were happening, but to look at this again as an opportunity that when things are not perfect, they are opportunities that the Lord uses to form his people in trust in him, and to look for them, the Lord to fulfill his end, his promise. All right, good. Let's get to Isaac making a fool of himself, shall we? Verse 7.
Father like
So
son.
he's in Gerar, which is in Philistia. Okay. And so when the men of that place asked him about his wife, he said, "She's my sister."
With these guys.
Like father like son.
I know. And I love the text here, right? For he feared to say my wife, thinking, lest the men of this place should kill me because of Rebecca, because she was attractive in appearance. I mean, we know, okay, great, she's beautiful, fine. This doesn't justify lying. We've been over this. So verse 8, when he had been there a long time, multiple years it seems, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac, we'll say laughing, because that's what the ESV says. What does the NIV say?
Caressing.
Blessing.
Fondling.
Yes, that is the technical word that's used in much of the early church's conversation, Jim. I do love that the ESV had to go with laughing with Rebecca, his wife. And somehow laughter between these two instantly made Abimelech aware that they were marital in nature. So, yes. Jeff, what translation do you have there?
NIV.
NIV.
Okay, it is the NIV there, yeah. So the word in Hebrew
Standard.
does, it has a meaning of kind of playfulness, or even kind of playful interaction, even in rare occasions, playful caressing. So this is a double entendre. Very similar usage actually to what we see in the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, when Aaron makes the golden calf, Israel gets up to play. They weren't playing games, if you follow that meaning. This is why the Lord gets really mad. It wasn't that they were playing soccer and not football. So Abimelech go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I got one about asleep, but the other one's hiding her face, so.
No, that's just fine. Yeah, I know. I said I did that too, actually. Before I looked at how the NIV translated this word, and I just looked at laughter, and I looked at the Hebrew of it, and I'm starting to read the church fathers. And in the middle of a sermon, John Chrysostom, who is in the middle of the capital of Byzantium at this point, kind of the center of all things, the church, right? And he's like just going over the word fondling and describing this activity. And I'm like, dude, you can't. Why are you saying this? But he's saying it because that's what the text is obviously talking about. So, yeah. So certainly Abimelech, whether this is the old Abimelech or whether this is a new Abimelech, the story has been passed down. You don't trust these guys, right? When they say she's my sister, you don't believe that, and you keep an eye out. So, so he's looking down out of a window. This is verse 8. And when they'd been there, Abimelech looked out the window, saw this happening. And so Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, she's your wife. How could you say she's my sister?" And Isaac said to him, "Because I thought, lest I die because of her." So here, unlike Abraham, who told a technical truth that Sarah was his sister, Isaac does not have that ground to stand on. She's a close relation, right, from his father's family, but she's not his sister. And he doesn't try and make her into that, but so he acknowledges his lie. And Abimelech says, "Why have you done this?" Right? "One of my people could easily have lain with your wife, and she would have brought guilt upon us all." And so Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." Okay. So certainly Abimelech has a nose for this, understands what's going on here. Before I get into the Clement comment, I have to say that this phrasing out of Abimelech does bother me. Could have easily lain with her. She is a good God-fearing woman, Abimelech. Come on, man.
No means no.
And fell on her, whoops.
I know. She is not some floozy out there. I mean, she went along with Isaac's stupidity and allowed this lie to be perpetrated, right? But nevertheless, she's not a pushover. But certainly it betrays the situation, right? That because of this lie, the men could have said, "Hey, we're going to enter into a marital contract," and tried to make that happen. And it could have been very, very bad. So for his people anyway. So Clement of Alexandria, so we're talking about noses here, has a very different kind of nose. When Clement reads the scripture, Clement out of Alexandria is a 3rd century church father, so like 200 AD. And he looks for Christ in the middle of all of these stories, often, I think even more than Origen, allegorizing material and sometimes really destroying the fabric of a story. In his teaching on this text, he actually makes Abimelech here a Christ figure. It's an interesting way to look at this. And that's because Abimelech certainly calls him to righteousness, calls Isaac out of this lie into righteousness. But even more so, Clement plays off of the names of Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac meaning laughter or rejoicing, and Rebekah submission, and sees this then as kind of the church laughing in their submission of faithfulness. And the Lord looks down from his heavenly place and rejoices over his people. Which I said, this is a nice image, Clement, but I don't think we're quite with the text here. I think we're probably, this is why, I think this example actually is why some of the early allegorists, those who want to make a story or talk about a story having additional meaning than just the literalness of it, get into trouble. Because they do things like this that really don't feel like you're following the same story at all. You're not connecting things together. You're not helping us see a bigger picture. You're now telling me kind of a different story. So wanted to bring that to your attention.
It's like the I've connected the dots. You didn't connect anything. I've connected the meme.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. I've connected all. Look at what I've done. Yeah. And it's definitely not that at all. Actually, the early church had an expression for this. A church father named Irenaeus, in writing against heretical interpretation, says anybody can take the pieces of a mosaic and put them together. And if you put them together in one way, you can make a fox. And if you put them together another way, you can make the Christ. So you got to figure out which one you're doing.
Yeah.
All right, good. So we don't have a good time frame, by the way, because again, Hebrew in Genesis here, they are not necessarily very strict in terms of their age and where they are in the progression of the story. We know that Isaac and Rebekah have 2 kids, but it's 20 years after they get married. We aren't terribly sure whether or not they have those 2 kids at this point or not, or if those kids are older, or what the case is, because they aren't mentioned in this story. Luther, and I kind of included that in the file I sent over here, that Luther puts Rebekah at this point at about 70 years old, and Isaac at about 80, which puts the kids at like 30 years old. So that would mean Jacob and Esau are kind of doing their own thing at that point, which maybe is why they aren't mentioned at all. Or if you don't follow this reasoning, you can just say it's in the 20 years before they actually have the kids, which makes a whole lot more sense to me in terms of where this story happens. But I'm sure Luther had his reasons for math, other than to say that she was very beautiful at 70 years old. All right. Anything in this little section here? All right. Hey, now we get to talk about parables. This will be fun. So verse 12, and Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy, and he had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. I would have stopped there at 14 here for a moment. So when Jesus tells the parables of the field, whenever there's kind of a harvest, and remember what the 3 big numbers he tends to use in terms of the yield of that field?
1, 5, and 10.
No, the 1, 5, and 10 are the talents.
Oh, okay.
Talents that are given.
Ooh, 30, 60, 100.
Yes, 30, 60, 100. Very good.
Gold
Very
star.
good. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm my number 2. Yeah, no.
Hey, that's all right. It's better than my college students would have been. So, and I've taught this to them already. So if you were to look through the Bible and you were to look for yields of fields, they're almost never mentioned. There is little biblical evidence for how much a field ought to produce. Now, I have heard and seen a gamut of what fields ought to produce. I have heard everything from 5 to 8 times as much was sown, which is really low yield. I've seen 40 to 50 as a normal amount. I've even seen 70 or 80 in very fertile places. But the norm would be somewhere in probably the 10 to 20 range is about normal. 30 is a little bit better. 60 is way better. And 100, if you read people that are interpreting the parables, 100 would be an impossible number. Most of the time when people are interpreting parables today, they look for an impossibility. They tend to view the parables as hyperbolic stories that take truth and they show us that truth by means of some impossible moment. Like the owner of the vineyard who pays everybody the same wage. That's impossible, right? Nobody would do that. When we get to, producing of grain, some 30, some 60. Okay, that could happen. 100-fold, that never happens, right? That's how all the parable interpreters go. But there's a problem with that. This verse, the only place that I have found 30, 60, or 100 as a yield for the fields of anyone's produce is right here. And it's 100. So when Jesus in the parables brings forward a field that is 100-fold, he's bringing Isaac with us, bringing Isaac to mind. Right? It is when he says 100, it is certainly this kind of impossibility, except for when the Lord is present, right? The 100-fold growth of faith, or the harvest of a field, is only by and indicates the presence of the Lord and the Lord's blessing. So when you see the parables and Jesus talking about that, he's referencing, for those who might have ears to hear, this story where Isaac becomes rich. In one season, he becomes filthy rich. It's like hitting the Powerball. And just overnight, he is absolutely set for life. There you go. So the parables, true things, not just made up crazy numbers, but true things. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, so is the 100-fold, okay, so I'm trying to think of this in terms of planting, like you're saying. So let's go small numbers just for ease of, So if I plant 10 seeds, 100-fold means all 10 produced. Not that it was 100 times those 10, because 10 seeds shouldn't produce 100 items. They should produce the item that they sowed.
Could produce 100 seeds.
What was that?
I said it could, if you took all the seeds from what was planted, maybe it'd be 100 seeds if you used it for seed. I don't know.
That would be the next year.
That would be for the next year, yes.
Right. So do you see my confusion? I'm sorry. So like
No, no,
like a 30-fold would say 30% of your seeds produced. Woohoo, that's probably a good number for a farmer. 60 is greater. 100, every seed produced, that would be impossible.
Yep. No, that's exactly, and produced a full crop.
Okay.
That's exactly what's going on. Yeah.
So it's not 100 times. That was my
Yeah, that is confusing.
But do you see what I'm saying? It's not saying he sowed 10 seeds and he ended up with 100. He ended up with a full 100%, not.
Yes, and that can manifest itself in kind of a variety of ways. With a head of grain, I have no idea how many seeds are on a head of grain. Certainly that math doesn't work out kind of 1-to-1.
Right.
But with some things it might, right? That, all right, we're going to plant 100 seeds and I get 100, fold growth out of this. Every single seed produces mightily. Maybe I do end up with 100 times what was sown. That times number only comes in one of Jesus' parables. It doesn't come in typically. Kind of that which was sown in his heart kind of deal. Produces 100-fold that which was sown in his heart. But that's a very different set of mathematics when you're starting to do heart produce than wheat or grain.
Exactly.
So, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So again, this, farmers do the same thing today. They can make a whole lot out of what they put in the ground, but they aren't getting every single seed to pop up.
Right. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, some falls on the path and it's eaten by birds.
To say that. Some is eaten by birds.
And therefore, now we have entered into the spiritual sense of this passage, right? That when Isaac sows the land, right? When someone produces, when the Lord blesses the message which is sent, that is the seed of the gospel, it produces. You cannot hold the word back. Very good. Thank you for that clarification, Linda. That's very helpful.
Okay. Sorry.
No. It's wonderful. It helps make things clear for everybody and helps me to remember that I need to make such things clear when I talk about them. All right. Where are we here? So the Philistines envied him, end of 14 into 15. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham, his father. And so Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we are." And so Isaac departed from there and encamped at the valley of Gerar and settled there. Now, why do you think the Philistines stopped and filled all of the wells that Abraham had dug?
They didn't want him to have access to the water to water his crops to make more.
Yeah, but I would agree with you. They certainly don't. They're going to fight over water because water is a very precious resource in this area. But the way that the text sounded to me, and maybe I'm not reading it right, Nancy, but the way the text kind of looked to me is that they did, once Abraham left, right, when he left Abimelech's side there, they took all the wells and they filled them with earth.
Oh. So they didn't leave them as producing.
No, they didn't. Why might they not do that? Why might they fill up those wells? They know that there's water there. Water is important. Why would they fill up wells that were working?
They were dug by the person that they're trying to get to not be in their area, then they might fill them in to keep that person from showing up and saying, hey, I have claim to these. You can't stop me from showing up and using them at the very least.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Lorelai. That's how I read this text. Absolutely. The Philistines do this because they want to make sure that Abraham has no claim on this land. They kicked him out. They're going to get rid of any memory of him. They're going to rewrite the textbooks, right? Okay. No more Abraham. And you know what they probably did? Like 30 feet down from where the well was, they made a new well. Because they're not dumb. They just want to make sure that you don't get to use it.
Got it.
Some kind of claim to the water in that well, he's going to show up and make it useful.
Exactly. And we actually see this happening in verse 18. So we go down to verse 18 here. And Isaac dug the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped up after the death of Abraham. So as soon as Abraham was dead, they filled them in before Isaac came back. Kind of a maybe he won't know kind of deal.
Surprise.
And sorry, go ahead.
I said surprise.
Yeah. And he gave them the names his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a spring of water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdmen, saying, the water is ours. So he called the name of the well Esk, because they contended with him. Esk means strife. And they dug another well, and they quarreled with him over that also. So he called it Shitna, which means opposition. And he moved away from there, and he dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. And so he called its name Rehoboth, which means breathe or breath. Kind of now I can breathe, saying the Lord has made for us room, and we shall be fruitful in the land. And from there he went up to Beersheba. So that's exactly what happens here. The Philistines fill in the wells in order to try and keep Isaac from any kind of claim to the land. When Isaac does come back down, first he opens them, and we see that the Philistines have no argument with him. He gets to use that water, but his flocks are now so big, they need to keep getting more water. So his servants start digging more wells. And the Philistines don't like that. So they take 2 of them. And Isaac lets them have them.
Basically, wherever he digs, he's going to get water because the Lord blessed him anyway. So it doesn't
Exactly. Yeah, this is kind of, this guy can't miss. That'd be a nice problem to have. Just a comment about direction here from verse 23, then we'll just kind of open it up. I'm sure I've skipped over some things that you guys are seeing and want to talk about. It says Isaac went up to Beersheba. In the Hebrew vernacular, typically they are not worried about cardinal directions. All right. They are worried instead about elevation. So you go up to Jerusalem and you go down to everywhere else from Jerusalem, because Jerusalem's on a mountain, everything else is below said mountain. Here, this is an elevation change to Beersheba. It's not up on a map. It's not north. That would be Zaphon. There is a mountain, the mountain of the north. It's called Zaphon, which if our VBS material does not mention Mount Zaphon as the mountain of the north, at some point, I'm going to be vastly disappointed.
Oh.
Ocean.
I will write it in.
That's right. That's right. Just going to be in there. Just someone is going to say Zaphon at some point.
Oh, I'll write that down.
There you go. There you go. It's the great mountain of the north. So that's just kind of, you always go up when you're physically going up. And just as a historical fact, if you ever look at ancient maps, particularly those before the Crusades,
That makes more sense.
you will find that the cardinal directions are either not present or are not necessarily accurate, because Jerusalem will be found at the top of the map. Ancient maps, particularly in Christendom, ancient maps were oriented with Jerusalem near the top. So you went up to Jerusalem on a map because of this ancient Hebrew vernacular. We do silly things. It's just kind of how the world works sometimes.
The ancient.
All right, what did I miss? What do we need to go back here through?
Why did they tell him to go away?
Why did they tell him to go away? Because God blessed him, and overnight he became the richest man in the world. So when he put out crops, everything worked, right? Everything produced, all of his land produced, all of his animals produced, all of his people produced, it seems, right? He became rich, very, very wealthy, far more than Abraham ever was. And in one fell swoop, he became the top dog. And so just like they were afraid of Abraham, they are now even more afraid of Isaac. Because if his God can do this, what can't his God do? And what happens if we make him mad?
Got it. Okay.
Jeff, are you trying to raise your hand, or are you just like
No.
hanging out?
I'm just stretching
Okay.
and
Good stuff. Because it was like off screen and I couldn't quite like, are you trying to ask a question? I can't, you're so big, man. I can't.
The wingspan is crazy.
I know. Oh, other things here. What else is in here that we want to talk about? Got just a couple minutes. So certainly in here, blessings in the world when we are blessed, it tends to lead the world to envy us and even to be afraid. Do you think the world envies any of our blessings today?
I don't know that the world recognizes our blessings as blessings.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think you're probably right that they don't recognize our blessings as blessings. But I do think there are at least some, we'll say at the edges, those who might be in some contact with church people but aren't church people.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking with a member today, and I think one of the places where the world is starting to recognize some blessing being found in the church is in the community. That there have been those who have gathered together digitally, physically, caring for one another during this time of pandemic, with a community that has been more or less unfaltering. When so many people were isolated, when our hospitals have now filled up with people with depression and multitudes of mental illness, they have had no one. And we have not been alone. And I think there are some who are recognizing that. And so that's a good thing. But I do think you're right, Ken. I don't think they see any blessings we have.
Well, I find that I can have peace even when things are chaos. Do you know what I'm saying? Or one of my favorite sayings is, I don't find my happiness. I don't base my innate happiness on the four walls that I reside in. Do you know what I'm saying? So I don't I don't have to have this and this and this and this and this in order to be happy. I can be happy even with a green front door, even though I don't like the color green. Sorry, that's one of my things. But I don't base my happiness on the fact that I don't know. But I think in the world today, everybody bases their happiness on that materialistic thing. It's not an innate thing. It's always how to find happiness.
And so, returning us back all the way to, I promise I'll get to you, Heather. I saw that. Returning us all the way back then to verse 1, right? That we find ourselves then with the world in famine. And so here we have an opportunity to share something like that, right? And this is a chance for the world to see and for us to share in the spiritual blessings that we do have, for we have more than enough. So maybe it's time for us to figure out how to do that in a way that we can be heard or seen or received and not become kicked out or afraid of. Heather, go ahead.
I was just going to build off of what Linda said, that so many people consider their what they own as their successes, how successful they are. And I think as Christians don't see it. We don't see it that way. We know we're blessed because we're given by Jesus. So
Yeah, op-ed in the Detroit Free Press today, right? We aren't listening to the lessons the pandemic is trying to teach us.
exactly.
Nope, we missed it. Well, some people missed it.
Some people. Others have a community, have a blessing, have a family, have care, and have a fullness and a richness that can't be taken away. And that's a good thing, a wonderful thing. And that's how we're going to leave it tonight. So I'm going to hit the end of the recording button.